Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. Respected brothers and sisters, respected viewers of MuslimDo, hayyakum Allah, ahlan wa sahlan. We welcome you. Again, I welcome you to my new program, Raising Children in Challenging Environment. Jazakumullah khair for following. Today is the second episode. And just to remind you, in the last episode, we spoke about tarbiyah, the meaning of tarbiyah, and we spoke about a very important concept and a very important question that I posed, which was, are you the only one interested in raising your children? Or are there other parties that want to raise your children with you, or maybe on your behalf? And when we say raising your children, unfortunately, it's not from the positive perspective, which is helping you taking care of your children. As we said, one of the descriptions that I kind of summed it up that suits our day and time, which was implanting the ideas in our children that will influence or impact their behavior. This is a very dangerous concept because others would want to implant certain ideas so they can direct their behaviors towards a certain direction, such as all the corporates out there that have massive marketing machines that want to influence our behavior into becoming consumers and buying their products. So this is also part of tarbiyah. So there's a physical part of tarbiyah, which is taking care of the body, and then there is the soft side of the tarbiyah, which is forming the ideas and the behavior. And we also said that we will be looking at this, inshallah, moving forward in more depth. But now, today, inshallah, we will be starting with our lessons from the life of Musa, alayhi wa ala rasulina salam, and how he was raised in one of the most difficult environments, most challenging environments, which is the house of Pharaoh. The childhood of Musa alayhi salam was not discussed or presented to us in a lot of details. However, whatever was presented in the Holy Quran has a lot of learnings and a lot of guidance for us Muslims. First thing we need to know that Bani Israel lived in Egypt for about 6 centuries. They migrated to Egypt with Nabi Yusuf alayhi salam, and that was when he invited his family, his tribe, was his father and his siblings, and they were, as recorded in historical references, about 66 or 70 men. With the family, probably we would say a couple of hundred people. And the first 300 years, they lived in peace and prosperity, because Yusuf alayhi salam, as we all know, he had an official status. He was a wazir, he was a minister in Egypt, and all it extended. That status gave Bani Israel, his family, his tribe, a special status in Egypt. They lived in an isolated area because they were mu'mineen, and Qawm Fir'aun, the Egyptians, they did not believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or in a revelation that came from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Bani Israel were kind of secluded, but they've always been a minority. But for 300 years, they enjoyed a special status. They enjoyed a luxurious life, if you will. And after the 300 years, what happened is the rulers of Egypt changed. And that's when the life of Bani Israel in Egypt turned around to become filled with misery and suffering. It was really, really difficult time for them. The Egyptians and the rulers of Egypt would abuse them. They enslaved them. They treated them terribly. And what's worse than enslavement. So for 300 years after, they lived in a terrible condition. They were a minority. They were an abused minority. They were enslaved. They lived in danger for 300 years. So you can imagine how a minority would feel in this condition. You can imagine how would you raise your children in such environment. Towards the end of these last or second 3 decades, the last pharaoh, or the pharaoh of that, which is the ruler, the Egyptian ruler of that period, he saw in a dream that a male from Bani Israel will destroy his kingdom. Bani Israel are already abused. They're already being abused in Egypt. And now the king or the ruler had a dream that basically showed him that a male from Bani Israel will destroy his kingdom. While he's in power, while he's got the authority and the power to do whatever he wants. What did he do? He said that he's going to, from now on, to protect himself and protect his rulership and his kingdom, he decided to execute every single male in Bani Israel, keeping the females. Reason being is they needed them as servants. So he started executing males, and then his ministers, his advisors, they suggested that if you keep executing all the males, we're not going to have anybody to enslave. We will lose our slavery power or labor power, because they used to do everything for the Egyptians. So they advised him to slow down on the execution, otherwise they will run out of the slavery labor that they need in their country, in their land. So they changed the rule from fully executing everybody to executing in alternative years. So 1 year there, whoever is born in this year, now we're talking about newborns. This is very important because his dream told him that a newcomer will destroy his kingdom. So he was executing all the newborns. So what he did, he modified that law to say that every second year he will be executing every newborn in Bani Israel. And that's when Musa alayhi as-salatu was-salam was born. He was born in the year where every newborn will be executed. Harun alayhi salam, his brother, he was born in a year where their lives were spared. So Sayyidina Musa, born in a minority that's enslaved by the rulers who were evil, and born in a year where there was a rule or a law to execute every newborn. So you can imagine how difficult this environment is. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Yes, we are living in a minority, but things are not that bad. Allahumma lakal hamd. So you can imagine the stress on his parents, or every parent in Bani Israel, to focus on raising their children. Their feeling is not, or their focus is not on raising them. Their focus will be on saving them from being killed, which they also couldn't push back because they were weak. What did Musa do? In the ayat in Surah Al-Qasas that beautifully describes the condition, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala started by saying, إن فرعون علا في الأرض وجعل أهلها شيعا يستضعف طائفة منهم يذبح أبناءهم ويستحيي نساءهم إنه كان من المفسدين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing the condition of Pharaoh, who was the ruler of Egypt at that time. And he said, إن فرعون subhanahu, he said, إن فرعون علا في الأرض. And العلو here is reaching a very high status of power. He was the ruler, the absolute ruler in that land, which was also very powerful kingdom or empire at that time. And imagine Pharaoh was a dictator who had an absolute power with a lot of resources, the water, the trades, the art crafts. It was a very rich civilization in all grounds, whether it's in natural resources, in power, and they also had, unfortunately, they had enslaved the children of Israel. That will also help them build a strong empire. They had a strong army. They were technologically advanced in their time. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is describing it with one word, ala fil ard. He reached a very high ranking and high status of power on earth. Fil ard, in the entire earth. So you can imagine how powerful Pharaoh was. وَجَعَلَ أَهْلَهَا شِيَعًا. And he had divided the people of his land into parties, which is referring to the famous concept of divide and conquer. So he was able to conquer and rule his people via division. He divided that nation into parties. يَسْتَضْعِفُ طَائِفَةً مِّنْهُمْ. And some of these parties, and this is referring to Bani Israel, one of the groups in his nation, in his land, that particular group was very weak. It was enslaved. That group was enslaved, overpowered, and that's where, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions the rule of Pharaoh there, that he would kill all the male newborns and will spare the life of their women, of their females. إِنَّهُ كَانَ مِنَ الْمُفْسِدِينَ. He was himself a corrupt, and he corrupted his nation and his kingdom. And indeed, his corruption was what actually destroyed his kingdom. He did it with his own hands. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَنُرِيدُ أَن نَمُنَّ عَلَى الَّذِينَ اسْتُضْعِفُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَنَجْعَلُهُمْ أَئِمَّةً ونجعلهم أئمة ونجعلهم الوارثين. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, but he had a plan. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had a plan for Bani Israel. He wanted to dignify them. He wanted to dignify them and make them leaders and make them the inheritance of the Pharaoh's kingdom. And what are they inheriting? They're inheriting their freedom. They're inheriting their livelihood by becoming free. And they're inheriting their sovereignty, their self-authority. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَنُمَكِّنَ لَهُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ. And they will, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them power. And وَنُرِيَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَجُنُودَهُمَا مِنْهُمْ مَا كَانُوا يَحْذَرُونَ. And whatever Pharaoh and his army and his ministers, whatever they feared from Bani Israel, which is the destruction of their own kingdom, they shall see it. Now let's get into Sayyidina Musa and his mother. So we described the condition of Bani Israel, and now with the few, I don't know, we have a minute or so, we'll start with the raising of Musa alayhi salam. It all started with وَأَوْحَيْنَا إِلَىٰ أُمِّ مُوسَىٰ أَنْ أَرْضِعِيهِ. There Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had revealed to the mother of Musa, and the wahi here is what she felt in her heart. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it wasn't a direct revelation like what's sent to prophets, but it was a feeling in her heart, Musa, to do what? To breastfeed him. Because when Musa was born, as we said, he was born in the year where all the newborns will be executed. So she was panicking. She knew she's going to lose her son. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave her that feeling and the peace in her heart. أرضعي, breastfeed him, and we will get to the wisdom in a bit. فإذا خفت عليه فألقيه في اليم. And then if you feel really scared that you're going to lose your son, throw him in the water. You read this ayah and you read, but how would a mother that fears for her son will throw him in the water? ولا تخافي ولا تحزني إنا ردوه إليك وجاعلوه من المرسلين. So that one of the stories of the Tafasir said that Musa built a crib for her son, and that her house was right on the Nile, the river. So she built a crib for her son, and she placed her son Musa alayhi salam in that crib, and she will take him into her house to breastfeed him. And if someone came to look for newborns, she would put him in that crib, and that crib was tied to a tree, so it will remain in the river, but he won't be at home. So the soldiers of Pharaoh will not find him or will not catch him. And she kept doing this. She'll bring him in to breastfeed him, and if she felt that someone is going to come and inspect her house, she will put him back in that crib. Imagine that life of fear, and imagine that life of stress from that Musa and all the women of Bani Israel went through. She's trying to take care of her baby, she's trying to raise her baby, but this is definitely not a healthy environment to do so. What happened next? How did she manage? What did she do? How the personality of Musa alayhi salam was influenced by what appeared to be a very terrible condition to produce one of ulil azm min al-rusul, one of the best, greatest rusul, that our Quran Kareem is full of his stories. What happened? Inshallah, we'll learn more in the next episode. Jazakumullah khair for your attention. Jazakumullah khair for following us. And we'll see you inshallah next week. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.